We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the radio show discussing the honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project, and Pat Rahm Emanuel in a kind of a prickly position, consistent with his demeanor. He's got problems. Terminated Gary McCarthy. That's the one head he lopped off this week after the Laquan McDonald protests. The questions surrounding the investigation of that case that's taken more than 13 months. You've got another case where a video is going to be released this coming week. The Ronald Johnson case, 25-year-old African-American man gunned down by police 8 days before Laquan McDonald, and the city, as in the Laquan McDonald case, opposed release of the dash cam video every step of the way for 13 months. Again, just the idea that it should take 13 months to investigate and dispense justice in these cases is a question in and of itself. Rahm Emanuel's descent from 2011, the celebrity coming back from Washington with on Obama's coattails to make the tough decisions, with an eye someday towards turning around Chicago and then elevating himself to a presidential candidate. Boy, that's all by the boards, isn't it? What do you see in terms of Rahm's future and how his future provides or doesn't provide an opportunity for seismic cultural and structural change in the city of Chicago?
I think this is a tipping point. I think that it's a political trope, but it's true, right? It's the cover-up that ends up coming back to bite him.
Although the crime in the case of Laquan McDonald from that video, pretty severe too.
But if Emanuel got out in front of it and said, hey, this isn't how policemen should work. We're going to do everything we can to X, Y, and Z. Of course, he didn't. He was fighting in an election. Now he's got the drip, 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 drip of the next video. He's got the potential, and we'll talk about this, of the teachers voting to strike in the city of Chicago. His idea of being president is over. First of all, it's absurd. I mean, if you're watching the presidential election, he could never be a presidential candidate. It's a national thing.
Could barely beat Chuy Garcia.
It's a television thing. He's got a terrible personality. He is basically an old machine, transactional Democratic boss, and the machine is breaking under him. And when it breaks, you're seeing the flaws exposed in a man who, frankly, is not the man that he portrayed himself to be to other people.
Would you say that he's half the man that he thought
he's a little less than half the man, little tiny dancer, as you like to call him. And I think that there is a real opportunity. There was an opportunity with Garcia, but then you get Garcia. I think there is an opportunity in the city, given what's going on statewide, given sort of the mood nationally, given that Governor Rauner is the governor and some of these sort of financiers of the city Democrats can potentially be persuaded by people on that side of things to move away from the transactional Democrats, to get a reformer in the mayor's office. The question is, how do you get Tiny Dancer out?
Well, the question was put to Tiny Dancer this week at a Politico forum in D.C. because the calls for resignations, like everybody's turned into Keith Olbermann. Everybody should resign right away. And
how's Keith Olbermann doing, by the way?
Right, exactly. Tiny Dancer was asked that question: are you going to resign? And we'll have to effort that audio. But essentially, Tiny Dancer said, I'm not going to resign. The election was held. The people have spoken. But I'm reminded of the scene in Hoosiers where after Jimmy Chitwood gets up and says, I'm not playing unless Coach Norman Dale stays. Then it was time for a revote. I wonder how Tiny Dancer would do if there was a revote in Chicago right now. Probably not too well. And so the question is, assuming that you can't force him out, there's no recall ordinance in the city of Chicago.
Correct.
Or the county of Cook. Maybe that's something that all the politicians preening before the cameras now to heap their moral scorn on the power structure they're a part of because it's safe to do so. And frankly, they need to do so in terms of salvaging their own political careers. And that includes little Lisa Madigan and Sack of Durbin and the whole rest of them. But maybe if Rahm is going to go to 2019, he is going to serve out the remainder of his term, maybe even run for re-election. Who knows what the world will look like 3 or 4 years from now with people's short memories. What is the opportunity that you could actually elect a center-right mayor of Chicago like New York has had, like L.A. has had in the not too distant past?
Well, before all of this, I would have said not great. But after all of this, and again, it's a long way to 2019, and a lot of things are going to happen in between. I think that there's an opportunity. I think, frankly, people should continue to put pressure on the mayor to resign. Obviously, the only way to get him out now is for him to feel so overwhelmed by pressure from public opinion, by feeling bad about himself, which hopefully, if he has a little bit of a soul, he would. If you continue to put pressure on him, that's the only way to get him out. But in the interim, that should be done anyway in the lead up to 19, because there is that opportunity. Like I said before.
I mean, you haven't had a candidate of a center-right perspective, a true, legit candidate for mayor since Don Hayter ran in 1987?
Sure, because the people who would be really good at that from the center-right perspective have recognized up until this point that it's a giant uphill battle. It's very difficult to get enough people to coalesce around that candidacy to make it worthwhile. And sharp, committed people can be sharp and committed to other causes than, this sort of previously quixotic cause. But now that narrative can change between now and 19, where someone who is capable, who could carry the message, who could get the finances together to win that election, would be willing and able to do it. And that's the groundwork that needs to be done if we want to change the nature of the city of Chicago. Because even if the governor gets done what he wants to get done over that period of time, and the legislatures gets what they want to get done over that time, the city is still going to be an anchor if that part of the problem isn't taken care of.
But let's talk specifically about the groundwork. You use the abstract terms. The groundwork, especially for a center-right candidate, I mean, yeah, you have to deal with the lakefront liberals, but the real challenge is there a center-right candidate who can develop and bring to the table significant support from the African American and Latino populations?
I think so, and on two issues, right? On the idea of what happened with Laquan McDonald and sort of how the police are treating the folks in that community, number one, and number two, on education. We're looking at this strike that's coming, potential strike vote that's coming up with Karen Lewis. We've talked about this many times before. Only 5% or so of CPS high school students are ready for college. At some point, that's got to break. Property taxes are going up to pay for the unfunded pension liabilities of police and fire in the city. So these are issues that impact people in the African American community, people in the Latino community, that if you have the right person to go out and reach out to the communities, which, by the way, as Republicans, and I'm a Republican, we've never been very good about doing that because we're not courageous enough to just go and be ourselves. Go be yourself, get a candidate who goes into those communities and sells the idea, like in Ferguson, like in Baltimore, like in Chicago, that the Democrats are not serving their voting bloc and not improving the lives of the people that are voting for them. I think if you had the right candidate, that could be done.
Well, so education, I mean, you're talking about what specifically? School choice, opportunity scholarships for families.
Correct.
So we're, 72 hours away from a CPS strike vote. How does a center-right candidate or a center-right movement separate parents who rally to the Chicago Teachers Union and the teachers? Because, of course, people are inclined to give the teachers that teach their children the benefit of the doubt. And especially when you have somebody who's wildly unpopular, like Rahm Emanuel, who's closed some local schools, and that's perceived as disenfranchising particularly minority families from local schools that they used to go to. You need safe passage routes to have your children go from home to school. That's how violent and dangerous some of these neighborhoods are. Again, something that has made Rahm and his administration wildly unpopular in those communities. So they rally to the teachers when they're about to strike. You have people who are good at math, or actually just even competent at math, say, well, it's not about not liking teachers. You just can't make the math work that Karen Lewis wants to make work. So how do you get to families and separate them from different elements of the same power structure, some of which they like and some of which they don't?
Well, it's a very difficult question. It's why the teachers union has been able to hold on to the power that they've been able to hold on to. I think that the distrust in city government currently among the members of that community, because of McDonald and some of the other issues, the Johnson video that's going to come out next week, opens the opportunity for you to have those conversations. But I think it's a person by person, group by group effort where you are telling them what the numbers are, and maybe disabusing them of the notion that every teacher is good, because those teachers are getting paid exorbitantly on the backs of students that they're failing. And I think if you told, I have a fourth grader, for example, a young mother or father of a fourth grade child in CPS, that they have almost no chance to be successful in life under the current structure, and you repeated that over and over again and convinced them of that and told them that they could go to the neighboring school with a voucher and they would have a great chance to succeed. I think if that message got out, over time you would change, not all of them, but enough people to make a difference by 19.
I think Kevin Williamson is onto something here in this piece he wrote this week in National Review about Republicans needing to be the champions of the urban centers. It's going to really be up to Republicans to make the case to save the cities, because the Democrats in charge of big cities like Chicago just are unwilling to make the difficult decisions required. And he writes, Republicans over the years have given city families, non-white, lower-income families in cities like Chicago, reasons not to believe they have those families' best interests at heart. But it shouldn't be too hard to look at a place such as Chicago, Williamson writes, and ask, does Rahm Emanuel really act in your interest? And it seems to me, rather than doing what the Democrats do, is telling them what they're experiencing, telling them what they should see, ask them the question. They know the answer. They know many of their neighborhoods are not safe. Many of their schools are not getting the job done. They live in neighborhoods that are not robust with economic opportunity. Once you get them answering that question, kind of nodding their head in your direction, then maybe there's an opportunity to say, well, there's a better way. And oh, by the way, we have some street cred here in this kind of center-right policy movement. We were the champions, like Illinois Policy Institute, of passing the food cart ordinance in the city of Chicago, so you could have largely minority entrepreneurs, largely Latino entrepreneurs, be able to be their own business person and provide for their family. That's a way we can go. We have some ideas on education. Urban Prep Academy, 6 years running. Every kid, young black men, every kid going to college, not selective enrollment school, lottery. So what's Urban Prep Academy doing that's not happening in your local school? Why don't we scale what black leadership of Urban Prep Academy is doing for young black men and bring that to your family, to your neighborhood, to your children, and to your neighbors' children? See, it seems to me there's like that opening question where you got to say, yep, or you got to have people who otherwise are not inclined to be sympathetic to our views all the time or believe that we have their best interests at heart, to establish that the people that are in charge, maybe that you voted for, they don't have your best interests at heart, and then kind of here's the better way. Yeah,
I mean, that's what we'd have to do. And it's a difficult thing to overcome, but we'll be able to overcome it. There's a lot of inertia. There's a lot of loyalty to Democrats and the sort of the local Democrats that sort of corral those votes. And frankly, as Republicans, we have not done a good job of going into those communities. I think we're just have been afraid to just go in there, be yourself, say, these are what our ideas are. This is what'll change our lives. It's the same thing that changes everyone's life throughout the state, and include those populations in with everyone else and stop being afraid or exclusionary to get on in there. And Williamson's right. We've done a poor job of that, and that has to end. And I think this is an opening for someone to do that.